So sometimes things become what they shouldn't. And that is never the intention. Things start out well, or we have great ideas or great hopes. And over the course of time, things change. Now, some of these changes are a result of choices that we make that maybe were not good. Some of the changes are just simply a result of the world we live in and life and days adding to our life and time passing. But it's not uncommon for things to become what we never intended, and then it's a burden. And we have to work our way out of what feels like a burden. We either have to normalize the moment, or we have to lean on faith, or we have to ask for help. But what I want to share with you today is stories that are like that. Some simple examples to make my point. If you happen to be married, marriage changes over time. Hopefully, when you're first married, you are super duper in love and Google-eyed and look right beyond all the little foibles of your spouse. But as time goes on, those little foibles become something else, and sometimes even an annoyance. And yet they were all there at the beginning. Marriage changes over time. If you happen to be a parent, you know that parenting changes over time. Parenting a toddler is not the same as taking care of an infant. Parenting a preteen is not the same as a teenager. Parenting a high schooler is not the same as watching your married child make decisions. Parenting an 18-year-old who knows everything in the world is not the same as parenting a 10-year-old who looks for your approval. Things change over time. The final example I share to try to catch everybody in the room is work. Sometimes when we first start working someplace, we're just excited to have a job and an opportunity. But then the longer we stay, the more we see different dynamics or expectations are placed upon us that were never spoken to us. And suddenly what we were excited about in a job becomes stressful. I may even toss in retirement for the heck of it, looking around at this crowd. Not pointing any fingers, Garnett. But you know, you might be excited about retirement, and then suddenly retirement might seem hard or boring or financially difficult. Things become what they're not meant to be, and our job is to adjust and respond in ways that are faithful and healthy. That is what happened to the Sabbath command. The Sabbath command was given as a gift to creation. It was to carte blanche tell everyone alive, all humans, all those who believed in Yahweh, God the Creator. It was to say that on the seventh day, you should rest and you should worship. It was given as a gift. The gift was explained because rest is needed. At this time, people lived a subsistent life. Their animals, their slaves, and even they themselves labored away, physically toiling day after day. And that rest was needed. And during that rest, relationship should be built. And the primary relationship was that of the people and God. And so the Sabbath command was given. But it became something it should not have become. In part, it became twisted and convoluted as a result of so many people unable or unwilling to observe the Sabbath. It just became less important, especially if we come to the 20th century, our present time. Sabbath almost does not exist. Do any of you remember a day when there was something called the Blue Law in effect? The Blue Law is what shut down every business on a Sunday. It was unofficial, but it was observed. No business is operated on Sunday that people may observe a day of rest or Sabbath. Back in the early days, it was always confusing. And so, through a process called midrash, midrash is a fancy term to say Jewish scholars, Pharisees, would explain what it meant to keep Sabbath. Midrash would be an explanation of the rules. And in these writings, or midrash, the Jewish scholars would determine what was okay and what wasn't. So along with Sabbath, there went 39 rules of how you kept Sabbath. And underneath each of the 39 categories were further explanations, so that there were thousands of rules, explanation, and regulations of what it means to keep Sabbath or break Sabbath. They were trying to clear it up. But what they did was to develop a system of judgment, to develop a system whereby they could look out upon people and levy a penalty because they weren't keeping Sabbath. Do you know that in Midrash, you cannot walk more than 2/3 of a mile to get to worship, or it's considered work? In Midrash, you are not allowed to light a candle or start a fire, let alone cook. But you could pay a Gentile to do it for you. So Midrash was just the explanation, but it turned into something that became a tool of judgment and imposition of fear. And the whole purpose for Sabbath was to allow us to have some rest and to worship. Do you think we live in a world today that still deserves some rest and some devoted, intentional time to worship and gather as community? We do. So here comes Jesus and his disciples. Two separate stories in the gospel. He and his buddies are walking through the grain fields, and his friends are hungry. So they grab grain and they start to shuck it and eat the grain whole. The Pharisees are upset and ask Jesus, "Why are your disciples eating, especially grain, on the Sabbath?" Because they had to prepare it. And by prepare it, they had to pick it and shuck it and eat it. Many midrash rules applied to the preparation of food. Now, really what the Pharisees are upset about is this Jesus who has come along and is changing the way control is emphasized over people. Jesus has come to teach about a personal relationship, love, grace, forgiveness. And in the old system, they wanted to talk about God's love is dependent on our ability to follow the law. And if we break the law, then to pay penalty and make sacrifice. They don't like Jesus' unconditional gift of love and grace. And so they're pressing him on this. They criticize him. Why do you allow your disciples to do this? The next story also takes place on a Sabbath. There is a man in the synagogue whose hand is crippled. Jesus knows he is being watched, and so he calls the man over. But before he does anything, he says to the Pharisees, he says to the very people who have made the Sabbath something it should not be, he says to them a chilling question. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill? They say nothing in response. I don't think Jesus is happy because it says he looked at them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of their heart. And then he tells the man to open his hand. After the Pharisees witness this, they go to another sect, the Herodians, and this is the definitive moment in the Gospel of Mark that they decide it is time to get rid of Jesus, and the conspiring begins. But this is all about Sabbath. It is all about sorting through how do we take intentional time to rest and connect with God. I'm not great at Sabbath. I work on Sundays every Sunday. So right there I'm working. So I'm supposed to take a day during the week, a weekday, and practice Sabbath. But I don't. I do things that need to be done around the house. I work an extra job. I'm guilty like many of you. I show up to church all the time, but that's because it's my job. But many people are even too busy to come and worship. Some people work in the medical fields, they must work. And so I think as we begin to evaluate, how do we treat Sabbath? Is it a gift or a burden? A simple question we could ask ourselves when it comes to observing Sabbath is, are we bringing life or are we killing something? Are we doing good or are we doing harm? These are not very easy to sort through. Let me throw a gray question at you. Is it okay to paint on the Sabbath? Your house or garage? I guess it depends on whose garage you're painting. If you're painting your neighbor's garage for no pay, it seems like that is bringing life and health and help to them. If you're just painting your garage to save money, I don't know, maybe you can't afford a painter. But what about your rest? What about your relationship with God? These are not easy questions in today's culture. We offer this service Wednesday night for those who do work on the weekends, so people can come and have a Sabbath time. What I do know is it is important that we remember the gift of Sabbath was there for rest and love and relationship building. And so we are encouraged to do our best to step in and evaluate and change so that Sabbath becomes a gift for us again. Not something we have to do, but rather something we enjoy because God meant it for good. I promise you, I think everyone's life is better if we worship regularly. I think the day-to-day struggles are easier. I think it's easier to deal with what is unexpected. I think all of that is better when we come together in worship. I think our life is better. But it is always hard to step in and change something. Think about all the examples I've given. It is hard to parent when it becomes difficult. It is hard to be married when it goes astray. It is difficult to remain on the job when it becomes something it should not. But in all of those cases, even the retirement example, sometimes it's hard to be retired. But all of those require an active choice to turn it back to what it was meant to be in the beginning. I was at an athletic event last week. It was a soccer game. We all know what soccer is supposed to be, a competitive, fun sport, but this is now state high school playoffs. It is the district championship game right here in Freeland. And as the fans are seated, they become more and more agitated and more involved with the game. Freeland goes up 1-0 over Alma, and it starts getting more heated. They go up 2-0, and the catcalls and the yelling starts. The officials are involved. And at 3-0, fans are yelling at each other. And fans are talking to the athletes on the field. This is not what an athletic event is supposed to be. The athletic director, who's a member of our church, stood up and loudly announced to everyone in a very direct way the proper way to watch the remainder of the game. And he was challenged by some of the fans. But the game changed from the point he stood up and turned it back into what it was meant to be. All that other stuff stopped. I know it was terribly difficult for Mr. Bell to stand up and do that. And it was upsetting and hard for him. And people ridiculed him and yelled at him. But he did the right thing because the game had become something it should not have been. Today, our invitation for Sabbath is to just try to see in our lives, is it the gift it was meant to be for us? I look at you and I think all of you deserve a day dedicated to rest, a day dedicated to worship, and I just encourage you to keep doing the best you can to honor that day in your life as it was given to you as a gift from God. Not one of judgment or condemnation, but one where you may feel better and draw closer to Him, your Creator. Keep coming back. It matters that you're here. Amen.